It's funny. Sometimes the most unexpected things spark these little aha moments. Like I was just watching that YouTube clip you sent over, the one with the two guys talking about learning, and wow, some serious gems in there.
It really makes you think about the word learning, doesn't it?
Yeah, they both seem to kind of, I don't know, tense up a bit when they first said it.
Like it brought back all those memories of being stuck in a boring classroom trying to cram for tests.
Totally. Not exactly the most inspiring image, right?
Yeah.
But then the one guy, he's like a learning expert or something, right? He said something that really resonated with me.
Oh, about how it's completely different when you're learning something because you want to, not because someone's forcing you.
Exactly. It's like night and day when it's something you're genuinely interested in.
You just soak it up, don't you?
Totally. And he even admitted to, forgetting almost everything from his biology classes. I have to admit, I felt that.
Well, it makes sense. Our brains are wired to prioritize information that's relevant to our lives and goals if it's not immediately useful.
Poof. Gone.
Exactly. But then he talked about going down these rabbit holes of knowledge when something did pique his interest. Like he wouldn't rest until he knew everything there was to know about it.
Have you ever gone on one of those deep dives where you just get completely lost in a topic?
Absolutely. Just recently I went on a deep dive into urban planning of all things.
Really? How'd that happen?
It started with this simple question about bike lanes in my city. And next thing I knew, I was reading about traffic flow analysis, zoning laws, the history of public parks. I mean, it was fascinating.
Yeah. See, that's what I love about learning those unexpected connections. Speaking of connections, that whole pizza dough analogy was hilarious, but it also made a really good point.
The pizza dough?
Yeah, about the difference between passive learning and actually developing a skill.
Oh, right. The pizza dough epiphany. It's a perfect example, isn't it?
So for everyone listening, this guy's trying to perfect his pizza making skills, right? He's watching tutorials, taking meticulous notes, following every instruction to the letter.
A whole 9 yards.
Exactly. But no matter how detailed his notes were, he was still relying on them as a crutch. He wasn't really internalizing the process.
Until he realized that the real learning was happening in the feeling.
Right. Kneading the dough, feeling the texture change in his hands.
That's where the magic happens.
And that applies to so much more than just making pizza,
Oh, absolutely.
Think about your own work, your hobbies, anything you're trying to learn. Are you just following steps, or are you really engaging with the process?
That's the key, isn't it? Engaging all your senses, getting your hands dirty, making mistakes even.
It's like the difference between reading about swimming and actually jumping in the water.
Exactly.
But you know what else really struck me from that part of the video?
What's that?
They talked about how important it is to actually give your brain time to, process and absorb new information. And that leads perfectly into the next big idea. They discussed the importance of do-nothing time.
It's like we're almost programmed to be on all the time, Constantly striving, optimizing, squeezing in just one more task.
Tell me about it. And they really hit a nerve when they started talking about those mindless breaks.
Scrolling through social media, refreshing our inboxes.
Yes. Like we think we're giving our brains a break, but are we really?
Not really. It's like we're filling every single crevice with noise and information.
So what they're saying is we need to actually schedule do-nothing time into our day. Actually block it off in our calendars.
Precisely. And not just 5 minutes here and there. We're talking about dedicated time for our brains to wander, to make connections, to process everything we've thrown at them.
See, that's where I struggle. I feel this constant pressure to be productive, to check things off my list.
I get it. But think of it this way, that downtime, that's actually when the real magic happens. It's when your brain can synthesize new information, connect the dots, come up with creative solutions.
Okay, you've convinced me. I need to schedule some do-nothing time. But speaking of things we should be more mindful of, they also touched on this idea of unconscious learning. How we pick up habits and behaviors from the people around us. Like that story about the toddler and the coffee cup.
Oh, yeah. So funny, but also kind of profound when you think about it.
Right. We're like sponges, soaking up everything around us, the good, the bad, and the caffeinated.
Exactly. And it made me think about how important it is to be mindful of who we're surrounding ourselves with.
Especially at work, right?
Huge. Think about it. Who are you spending 40 hours a week with? What are you picking up from them?
Are they inspiring you, challenging you to grow? Or are they reinforcing bad habits?
It really makes you stop and think, doesn't it?
It does. And it all comes back to this idea of being intentional about our learning, about choosing our influences wisely, which, by the way, leads perfectly into what I think is the most actionable takeaway from this whole video, their Learning Out Loud challenge.
Yeah.
So tell me more about this Learning Out Loud challenge. What is it exactly?
Well, it's not some big complicated thing. It's more about the idea of just creating a space, with a friend or colleague or even like a whole group where you can just talk about the things you're learning, but without all the pressure of like grades or tests or anything like that.
Kind of like a casual book club, but for anything you're learning.
Exactly. And the best part is they don't try to force any one specific format for it either.
So it could be anything from just like a quick chat about a podcast you like to maybe like summarizing an interesting article you read.
Exactly. The whole point is to experiment and find what feels natural and engaging.
Like, what would be some good ways for people to try this out?
Well, you could do something as simple as grabbing a colleague and committing to sharing one interesting article with each other every week or something like that.
Or even like a lunch and learn type of thing.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Where everyone brings one thing they learned that week that they're excited to share.
It's almost like we're sort of hacking the traditional way of learning, right?
In a way,
Like
yeah.
no tests, no pressure, just that pure joy of discovery and sharing it with others.
And that's how we learn best, isn't it?
Absolutely. So to everyone listening, this is your official invitation to join the Learning Out Loud movement.
Find your people, find what you're curious about, and just start sharing.
Exactly. And as you do that, remember what we talked about earlier. Be mindful of what you choose to focus on.
With so much information out there, the ability to filter the noise and figure out what's actually important is a superpower.
It's not about learning more. It's about learning better.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, that about wraps up our deep dive for today. And I have to say, I'm feeling pretty inspired. What about you?
Absolutely.
I'm adding do nothing time to my schedule. I'm going to be more intentional about who I'm learning from, and I'm definitely going to try out this whole learning out loud thing. Until next time, keep those learning journeys going, and remember, we're all in this together.